Thanks for coming out. We have a great presentation tonight, the state of the Severn, and we have Dr. Andrew Muller and Captain Diana Muller here going to be telling us all about whether our river is good or bad or sick or well or whatever. So we have a great, it's going to be grand. I do ask you guys to bear with us. Andrew likes to be walk around a lot, and he talks a lot off mic. So you're going to have to keep it down there, and I'll play door duty and try to keep that down there. But you'll have to put up with us a little bit because Andrew's very, what's that word? Socratic. He walks around a lot. I forget the Greek word for that. Welcome to the Severn River Association's educational meeting. I wanted to let you all know that there was rumor that we're going to have a December meeting. We're not. That December meeting is going to be rescheduled for February. So our next gathering will be January 15th, right here again. And this one's going to be about fishing. Who here's a fisherman or a fisher lady, right?
Angler.
Who here does all their fishing at Safeway? All right. Own up to it. Yeah. So, John Page Williams will be presenting in January, and he's going to talk about something that's dear to all our hearts, the connection between oyster reefs and fisheries and how smart fisher peoples like to hang out at the oyster reefs. So that's January 15th. And meanwhile, I want to introduce to you Dr. Andrew Muller and Captain Diana Muller. They've recently formed a new partnership. I can't even pronounce it. What's it called? Maritimas. I think that has a maritime sound to it. The Mullers have been running the estate of the Severn River for the past few years, and this year we had some exciting developments in that the Severn River Association and the Severn River Keeper, and we have them over here, were partners in helping collect data for Diana and Andrew to put this thing together tonight. So our new partners, Nate and Sarah over there. Give them a hand. And we have some partners in, we got Mark Lister over here and Ted Delaplane back here. Both have been developing on the SRA part of the river. So our crew, come on, give them a hand. And everybody was asking, are we going out tomorrow? Because Wednesday's our usual routine. And no, we're not going out tomorrow. Sorry. It's too, I'm afraid of cold water. So anyway, Diana and Andrew will take over. And guys, if you keep it down and listen tight, and then I'm sure they'll entertain questions at the end of the presentation.
So how are we doing tonight?
Good.
All right, can you hear me in the back? Yes? Excellent. All right, before we get started, there's a couple of things I just wanted to do, a few shout-outs and sort of orient everybody. We do this a number of times. We've done it for South River Federation when Diana was working there. We do it now for Severn River Association. But I want to point out two really important things, or two important people. There's been a lot of resurgence in the citizen science or citizen monitoring. I think it's really important. The state of Maryland has finally recognized that they can't do it by themselves. There's no way. And so they need our help. And so two people really important to this, shout out. For over 10 years ago, Dr. Pierre Hencart, working with the Severn River Keeper program, started coming out here in the Severn River because he wanted to understand the health of the river. And he started making these measurements. He's not an oceanographer. So he gets a book, he learns how to do it, he asks people how to do stuff, and he learns. And he starts documenting the conditions of the Severn River. And he's the first person to really recognize and get the state to kind of maybe think about that the Severn River has dead zones. That it's important, that there's something not right with the Severn River beyond what the state is doing. Meanwhile, I show up at the Naval Academy to start my new job. Diana gets her new job at South River Federation. And Diana, having the background that she does from the Chesapeake Bay program in Norfolk, she sets up a mini Chesapeake Bay program in the South River. And she really gets cooking. And she gets the state to recognize and EPA to recognize, wow, people can really do this. And it's kind of funny that Diana's a chemist. They're calling her a citizen scientist. In fact, call me a citizen scientist. It's kind of funny. But I mean, now, non-traditional partner. That's what I am. So the point is that Pierre and Diana really were able to document and show that citizen scientists can make a difference, document what's going on, and finally they're starting to invest in citizen groups. And quite honestly, it's because of them that there's the new monitoring cooperative. Some of you are starting to join that, get training, and do that. But it's really because of them that's really important. And also, one other thing, Diana's truly amazing, not just because she's my partner and everything, but I just want to say that Diana is incredible. She spent the entire summer battling breast cancer. She is a breast cancer survivor. So she trained groups. She helped do the data analysis. She got A's in all her classes at Johns Hopkins and beat breast cancer all at the same time.
Right.
Truly a superwoman.
So for all you women out there, get checked. I went in for a regular mammogram screening. I don't have so-called breast cancer in my family at all, so they put me on, and I'm boring, I'm healthy. I'm out doing half marathons. Last year I did the Annapolis 10 miler. I went in for a regular checkup, and they found something. 2 days later, they had me do an ultrasound. 2 days later, I went for a biopsy. July 9th, they called and said, yep, you have breast cancer. And my mom did die of ovarian cancer, but they thought that was just something that happened. And over here, Anne Arundel was absolutely great. They had me do genetic testing, and it came back that I am positive for the breast cancer mutation BRCA2. We didn't know that. That's really important to know. Ask a lot of questions, because women, we don't talk. My mom didn't tell me anything. Her mom didn't tell her anything. We don't talk. This is a gene I can pass down to my kids. And something I told Bruce that he didn't know either, Bruce Potter, this can be passed down to boys. The BRCA mutation, just because they call it breast cancer mutation, doesn't mean it just causes breast cancer. If it's passed down to my son, he has 50% chance of getting the breast cancer mutation, which provides him a higher risk of getting prostate cancer, melanoma, and colon cancer, an extremely high risk. So men, find out whether or not your mother or your father has BRCA, because you are at risk as well. And that's my platform. All right?
Let's go.
Okay, so partnerships. Partnerships are everything, right? There's not a lot of money right now with our current political administration, so we need to partner and work together nicely and collaboratively. So there's some shout outs, because I don't have a boat, Andrew doesn't have a boat. So
Even though I'm at Navy, we don't have any boats.
So we need to thank Mr. Keith Underwood and Mark Lister for donating their boats and their gas. That's a lot of time and money for taking us out on the water, for taking our volunteers out. So Severn River Association, Severn River Keeper, Andrew, myself, Tammy does the Operation Clearwater, Keith, Mark, all JPW, Chesapeake Bay Foundation,
Absolutely.
And all of the volunteers that went out this summer and sweated their tails off. When we trained, I try to make it really important that going out in the heat is not fun. I've done it since I was knee-high to a caterpillar, but the data is so important. And I know people don't like to go out in the cold, but that's really important too. So it's all about the partnerships.
Absolutely.
Okay, methodology. I want to go over this really quickly. This is really important because we are being watched. Andrew and I sit on staff, Scientific Technical Advisory Committee to EPA. They actually are using the peer-reviewed paper that we wrote on the South and the Severn River in 2014 and are redesignating it and calling it triplets. So we are actually calling the Severn River triplets. And the little fingers that go in and out of the Severn and South and Magathie are recognized by EPA as triplets.
Right,
Not like
little
riblets, triplets.
Triplets.
So
Little
weekly,
tributaries.
and next year we really want you guys to start in April. That's training at the end of this. So weekly from July to end of October, the Severn River Partnership performed vertical water quality monitoring in the tidal estuary using YSI probe multimeters for dissolved oxygen, pH, temperature, salinity, and they took water samples for bacteria. We QA/QC'd the data, we did the data entry, we processed the data statistically in accordance to EPA program and the MTAC protocol. The MTAC protocol is the Maryland Tributary Assessment that I helped write. with Dr. Bill Dennison over at Ian Umseys.
So a couple of important things. We got a little bit started late this time around. Both groups, we made sure they had exactly the same instrumentation, got trained on that instrumentation. It's really important that you know your instrument, know how it functions, know what kind of measurements it makes, know how to calibrate it, know what it can do, what it can't do.
And know when it's broken.
Right. So really important kinds of things, because you can be taking garbage data, right? All of this is only as good as the information that you collect. But on top of that, it's, you can go out and take data. Anybody can be trained to take data. Doing it well, consistently, is not easy. And more importantly, once that all comes back, what do you do with it? And that's really the second part of this partnership. Diana's new company, Maritimas, is all about data analytics. That is, when you bring all of this stuff in, what does it all mean? How do you interpret the data? It's not just about whether something passes or fails a criteria. That's fine. But it's more about the story. What really happened? And that's what we want to tell tonight.
Severn River tells us the story. All right, so these are the monitoring stations. The little teeny green dots is where Severn River Keeper and Severn River Association went all summer.
These are the sites for this particular season that our groups could honestly commit to. That is, that they could go out on a regular basis and go and monitor. We also were fortunate to have a project, Naval Academy, that is myself, and Chesapeake Bay Foundation, John Page Williams and Allison Colden and others, looking at a nice little project, also at Winchester Lump, and a reference site, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but that provided some extra data as well. We have some data from the Naval Academy, from their sites, in terms of continuous monitoring data. And so we've got a lot of data that we kind of pulled together from different sites. And so we've got sort of a picture about what's going on for sort of 2018, even a little bit of 2017, and where we're going. And that's what's really important.
I want to make sure it's clarified that this is tidal data, it's not stream data. I would like to train our volunteers next year to do stream data and expand that to something that I did at South River, where we had a group of volunteers doing streams, restoration and non-restoration, as well as the tidal area. When the rubber hits the asphalt, when I sit at an EPA meeting, Dr. Peter Tango flat told me the TMDL is for the tidal area. It's not for the streams. So they need to make sure that we're integrating everything together. So all the monitoring components are all important.
So we need more volunteers.
All right, are you guys ready for the grades?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, water clarity was an 80% this year. Dissolved oxygen is 62, bacteria 82, total nitrogen 17% passing, total phosphorus 50%. The way these are calculated is based on MTAC, Maryland Tributary Assessment Coalition criteria that I have to sit and do a lot of crunching on. I do it in accordance to their guidelines. I don't put an actual grade on it, A, B, C, D, E, because to me, what do you guys think a 62% is? If your child came home with a 62%, what would you do?
Study harder or take away stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
So my son's a senior in high school. He came home with a 62%. I know he ain't going to college. And he's at college bound right now. 62% according to the MTAC protocol is a B minus. 62% to me is a D. So I let you guys are smart enough to know what a 62% is. So that's why we don't actually give it a grade.
Yeah, it's really important. If it's a B minus, you don't have to do much more to do restoration, right? It's pretty close to being restored. But we know we got a lot of work to do.
Right.
Here.
You guys see it? You've been on the Severn River. Okay, so now let's get to the story. Dissolved oxygen.
All right, in terms of dissolved oxygen, we all know that oxygen is an important criteria for our organisms to be healthy. I put this up here because how do you choose what it means to be healthy? And a number of people have different definitions about what this means. The Chesapeake Bay program, for these particular areas, these small triplets, these small areas, the Magny, Severn, South, West Road, the lower western shore, we pick a criteria of 5 milligrams per liter of oxygen for being considered healthy. 5 and above. Below that is considered not, I guess what you'd say, sub-norm oxygen. So if it's healthy, 5 and above is considered normal oxygen. Subpar oxygen levels, if below 5 milligrams per liter, once you start reaching a level of about 3 milligrams per liter, many of our organisms are starting to feel very stressful. It's the minimum amount of oxygen really necessary for oysters and crabs for basically doing decently. Below that, they start getting extremely stressed. So once you reach below 2 milligrams per liter, now you've got a condition called hypoxic, right? So sub-level oxygen, insufficient amount of oxygen. It's a term borrowed, of course, from the medical community. It's when your lips turn blue. You don't have enough dissolved oxygen in your blood. Of course, I've never checked fish lips to see if they actually turn blue for this stuff. But it's important. You do. And then, of course, you can get even lower than that. You get below 0.2 milligrams per liter. We're going to call that anoxic. That's about the range of the instrument anyway, the lower limit. So you can't really get any better than that for the instruments that we're using. So if you're less than that, 0 to 0.2, you can even get negative numbers if it's super bad. But this is critically important because this is where you got dead zones, where you don't have things living in the bottom sediments. Now, we got some problems with bottom sediments in the Severn River. All right, so here's an interesting project. I put this up here because this really highlights a lot of problems for the Severn River in particular. So, along with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, this is really an idea of John Page Williams and others.
Hiding right back there in the corner.
I can't see that far, but so this is really important. The idea is, can we do something to restore places in the Severn River and other areas by putting in reefs? That is, creating reefs, putting in reef balls, and getting our oyster population to grow and cause this nice irregular surface. The whole idea from a physics point of view, this is not necessarily just about filtering the water. We know the benefits that oysters provide from doing that, but we're talking about physics here. That is, could you create a nice irregular surface with the growth of oysters on these reef balls to induce microturbulence, enough that would help improve the water quality in an area? So we put out a bunch of reef balls in this Winchester lump area, and we put a continuous monitoring device. This device is taking measurements quickly. It's doing it at least every 15 minutes. In some cases, it is doing it more often than that. You can program it to do lots of different data bursting. So this is sitting at about 8 meters, right in the middle of this nice little oyster reef that we put out earlier this year. So we put it out, I think in April is where we set stuff out. And then this is from June, it's 2 weeks from end of June into July. Bottom dissolved oxygen. What I want to point out, look at that in the bottom there. This is continuous measurements. This is not weekly. This is happening every 15 seconds, 3 days straight of anoxic conditions. 3 days straight. Not up and down, no diel migrations like people would think about. You know, the classic, you've got photosynthesis going on during the daytime, la-di-da, beautiful. They've got, you're producing dissolved oxygen, then you've got no photosynthesis going on in the evening, and you've got respiration actively going on, and naturally the oxygen goes down a little bit so that you get this twice a day nice little thing. No, this is dead.
So was it hot?
We got a lot of rainwater, a lot of mud water, and we had a actually a gigantic algal bloom before this. You got a ton of nutrients coming in the system, right? And when you got supercharged nutrients and hot water, you're going to get large algal blooms, and we're going to go through this again. When you got giant algal blooms, the algal bloom monster, it's going to consume all the nutrients, and once they're gone, the algal monster dies. And now you got a big problem, because once the algal monster dies, bacteria come in, and remineralize or break down that organic matter. So this thing is sinking in the water column. It's being remineralized or being reworked by bacteria. And in the process, it's aerobic, meaning it's using oxygen. So oxygen is being taken out of the water column. So no surprise, this is horrendous. And it's really what's going on in several areas. It's not just the Severn River. It's going on in all of these tributaries, lower western shore, going on for a very long time. And we'll continue to...
Now these were not mature oysters, just to make sure everybody gets that. These are what, JP, spat-on shell that were on the reefs. So they haven't even had a chance to mature yet to be able to even filter water.
It was unfortunate. I didn't expect so early for this to set in. But it happens.
Hypoxic squeezing lower western shore.
All right, so here's something that I think is really important. Now, when we talk about the criteria for dissolved oxygen being 5 milligrams per liter, one of the things that we do is we look at the entire water column. We don't just look at the surface and the bottom. We're interested in the entire water column because it's a habitat for
Fish
all
swim
organisms.
through the water column.
Right? So we want to understand. So that 62% is 62% passing for the entire water column for all of those areas. So you know, there's been a lot, there's a lot of data at the surface. And fortunately for us, the Severn River group taking measurements every meter, right? The Severn River Keeper group doing it beautifully every quarter meter, because we really want to understand the dynamics of the area, the microstructure of the area. And so for me, greater 62% doesn't mean much. I don't really know what to say, quite honestly, about the health of that. I want to know what's really going on. So what I've done is created this hypoxic squeeze index. And the idea behind hypoxic squeezing is the fact that during the summertime, you get hot water at the surface, right? It's cooking, okay? Fish have a thermal tolerance, so do grasses. So all of that. So this is really important. This warm water at the top, fish are going to want to either get out of that area or swim down to cooler water, right? But here's the problem. We talked about that algal monster, right? So now we got low dissolved oxygen at the bottom, maybe anoxic water. And over time, over the summer, what we've got is that hypoxic water or that anoxic water coming up from the bottom and hot water coming down from the surface. So the livable environment, the habitat for that fish, for those grasses, for whatever it is we're doing, it's getting squeezed out. There isn't lots of room in there. And so I created an index, if we go back to that other slide, an index to kind of quantify what we mean by that. And so if you take a look, that's hypoxic squeezing, I've looked at this idea, and again, this is how much of the livable habitat that is the dissolved oxygen squeezing out. Again, high hypoxic index means that you're really losing habitat. And so what I've been able to show is that if you've got a lot of squeezing, if you've got a hypoxic index of about a 3, you're looking at about 70% of the water column being below 2 milligrams per liter. That really tells me something about the health of the system. If I'm hypoxic for 70% of the water column or 50% of the water column, that's really not good. And so I've tested what these tributaries, the Magothy, the South, the Severn, the Road, even the West River, this is using the state's data, this one station that they go out here, the WT 7.1. I looked at the state's data because we've got 30 years of data, so I can do some math with that. I can create a climatology using 30 years with that. I can't do it for 2 or 3 years. I can do it for 30 years. And so what I discovered is that there's really no statistical difference between the Magothy River, the Severn River, and the South River. So I can kind of pool all of that data together and say, like the Lower Western Shore, it looks like this. Western Road look very different. They're they're much shallower. They're responding a little bit differently. So what I've noticed, though, for this area is that we don't see any difference for almost 30 years. We've been squeezing, we've been responding to the climate. That's what's going on here. Wet, hot years, conditions look poor. Cooler, drier years, conditions look a little bit. We're doing this. We are responding mostly to the climate. Now, yes, some areas of the Chesapeake Bay maybe even some areas here and there. There's some response, maybe kind of, sort of, to the restoration that we're doing, attempting to. It's not quite there yet. That is, the climate system is the dominant thing going on right now. We got to get more restoration, more stuff going in, more projects, doing it better to overcome our climatology. That's the important thing. We got to get to the point where we're looking better despite the hot, wet weather, right? That's what we need to get to.
All right. So it's pretty much already did hypoxic squeeze.
Right, this is
index.
the idea of the hypoxic squeeze index, how I calculate.
Right. Aspen Creek. One of my really, every single triplet has their own personality, which is why we can't do restoration one size fits all. Every single one of them needs to be performed uniquely in accordance to the triplet that they're going into. And I've seen some cases where they have failed when I was a river keeper because it didn't handle the amount of volume of water going through, so they blew out. Aspen Creek, how that one's going to have to be restored is going to be very unique. So this one is a mini fjord. It's got a sill at the entrance, so there's no flushing, and it has a horrendous dead zone.
I'm going to make this clear right now for those people who are really interested in restoration projects in the Severn River. You got to start looking at Aspen Creek. I mean, you really got it. This is
That's
by
gotta be a
far
priority.
this is the priority. I know people like to do their backyard. I know that. I get it. I know you got to do it where you can get your money, but you got to start.
But it's
looking.
all our backyard.
You know, it's just like when we were looking at the South River. You know, Broad Creek by far was the worst creek there, and it still needs more restoration. Church Creek is on its heels, and actually Beards Creek has come up much worse now. Again, the story is really overdevelopment. You all know the story. We can't outpace the development. All right, so again, just to look at that hypoxic squeezing from different sites. No surprise, Aspen Creek has really got the the big issues. And again, the issue here is if you take a look at hypoxic squeezing and temperature, this is a lot about what's going on. You're cooking that water. I have seen Round Bay, excuse me, in excess of 32, 34, 35 degrees Celsius. 35 degrees Celsius in the surface water in Round Bay is outrageous. That's bath water. And of course, the warmer the water, the less oxygen it can hold. So you're already starting at a disadvantage, right? And then you've got all of that organic matter loading, supercharged nutrients, mainly due to stormwater runoff, right? And you've got a recipe for disaster. And that's what we've been seeing for a long time in these creeks.
All right. Here's so I've been finishing up my certification in GIS as well as everything else I've been doing. So here's a simple water clarity map that I've done a bajillion times for other organizations. Red is below 0.6. The mean in Comar, of all things written in the Code of Regulations for the state of Maryland, is water clarity. The stupid disc. It's a plastic disc painted black and white.
It's a very
It's
handy
not
low-tech
high-tech.
tool.
You put it down, and everybody's eyes are different, right? Can you imagine? Andrew's legally blind. Can you imagine him doing water clarity? He'll get a different number than me. I have 20/10. I have super good eyes. So you put it down, and I might get a 0.6. He might get a 0.5. My intern might get a 0.4. We'll just get, and the boat's bouncing around, right? So it might be a 0.4 plus or minus 3 feet, depending on where you're at. But they wrote this in Comar. So I look at it because I used to be a QA/QC officer at Lancaster Labs, so I can punch holes in data like you wouldn't believe, because it's been done to me. I've had EPA auditors, FDA auditors, all sorts of lawyers trying to punch holes in order to stop lawsuits. So this one, written in Comar, 1 meter. So 1 meter is required to be, so that's our criteria. If it meets 1 meter, if it fails 1 meter.
And this is really important. This is specifically for grasses.
Right.
Because it turns out that when you take a look at the Secchi disc, we're looking at the photic zone, the lighted area of the water column. Grasses need light to survive, right, to photosynthesize. So it turns out it's a nice handy-dandy kind of rule of thumb that was done in the United Kingdom in estuaries. They have very turbid estuaries that are very similar to these triplets. the fact is, a nice little rule of thumb that if you take the Secchi disc depth and you multiply it by 3, so 3 times the Secchi disc is just about the maximum thickness of the photic zone. So it's what is available in terms of light for photosynthesis. So you think about this, most of our creeks are what, about 3 meters deep? So about 1 meter seems to be about right to reach the bottom. So if you're less than 1 meter, your bottom in many of these creeks is not receiving enough light for your grasses to thrive. They're going to start dying off, they're going to start having problems. This is one of the main reasons why in many of these areas you don't see a lot of grasses in the creeks. The other area is those bottom sediments. Many of you know that it's chock full of goo, that black muck in which those grasses really can't thrive in those either. You know, those people in the SAV Navy, anybody here doing the SAV Navy kind of stuff, you know where you find those grasses, sandy bottoms. Shallow sandy bottoms all along Round Bay, right? That's where you see in most of those.
They don't like to grow in goo.
They don't like to grow in goo, so really, really important
All right, so the median water clarity was 0.8. The biasing on the data is our team couldn't really start collecting until July 1st to the end of October. Statistically, in accordance to what the state of Maryland and EPA wants, you want to begin at the beginning of April and go to the end of October. So that's the data set that they use when they talk about the Bay Program water clarity and seagrasses, is the monitoring season is April 1st to the end of October.
So some of this data is a little bit skewed to a little bit more positive end because we missed some of those big events early on, but we know we got more work to do.
All right, total nitrogen, 17% passing. Again, this is just using the state of Maryland's data. What we would like next year is a collaborative effort to go and, this is going to take money, to go and have our people out and collect water samples and send them to a third-party lab. And there's crazy reasons why I always send samples to a third-party lab. You want them EPA validated, and you might want to do something with that data, because we are looking at restoration progress as well, right? So we want to make sure that it's validated. Nobody's coming back saying you skewed the numbers. So we need more nutrient data besides one station once a month. But even with that, one station once a month, 17% passing total nitrogen is not that great. And this is GIS, this is right from the county. For all the septic systems around the Severn River watershed.
Septics.
Where is that? What part of the Severn?
Yeah, above Round Bay. That's right.
Above ground?
Oh, can you put the map back for a second?
It's slow. There we go.
So yeah, these systems have to be checked out.
So in
looked
between,
at.
I had to cut it in order to make it bigger, because there is a center one. So above Round Bay and the bridges.
So you think you got all the So
Right.
this is really important, is we've been trying to reduce nutrients. We've been doing a lot of reductions in nitrogen, some reductions in phosphorus. Many people think that we've gotten rid of the phosphorus. Actually, we haven't. A lot of that phosphorus is stored. Thank you. A lot of the phosphorus is stored in the bottom sediments. So many people think that the phosphorus is locked to the sediments that come from stormwater runoff. But it turns out that it gets stored in those bottom sediments, especially during wintertime or springtime events, gets stored in those bottom sediments, and then all you need is a little bit of nitrogen in the system, just a little bit, to get things cooking. It remobilizes the phosphorus and allows for the extended anoxia that we're seeing. So all that stored phosphorus from all the clear cutting that we've done for decades and decades and decades is really what's going on here. So we're not going to restore until we deal with those sediments. In fact, quite honestly, many of you know my thing about this. When we say restore, the first question that comes to mind is, what are we restoring to? I don't know what that answer is. We're not going to go back to pre-industrial revolution levels. That ain't happening, right? Can we get to 1980? I don't know. But here's the thing is, I don't think we can actually restore. What we can do is rehabilitate. That's the answer here. That is, and again, I hate to say this, but the fact of the matter is, when somebody has a heart attack, you don't restore them. You rehabilitate. They never go back to the way they were before, right? And the same thing with the bed. We have shocked the system. We have damaged the system. They're never going to be back to the way it used to be. The question is, what do we want it to be, and how do we get there? This is really important.
So these pictures come from Sarah. This is a microcystis bloom. Nate working out in the field. This is
Some people saw this, right? And some people were out and saw this nasty bloom out in April. Is that when that was?
It was Labor Day, Memorial Day
Memorial.
weekend, and it was Clemens Creek.
Yep.
There you go.
That's something that's very interesting that we've seen a lot of also. Not only have we seen this, but excuse me, my friends over at Old Dominion down in Norfolk, what we're seeing is these algal monsters that are growing in the tidal creeks, the triplets. They start in the triplets, again, it's that stormwater runoff, supercharged nutrients. They start in the creeks, or these triplets, and then they move out into the main areas and can poison, large areas. And you go through a faunal succession. That is, you can get bloom after bloom of different species as the temperature structure changes over time. So very interesting.
Okay, bacteria. Important because we like to swim, right? Part of the Clean Water Act says swimmable, fishable waters. Really wasn't that swimmable this year, even though 82% passed. Again, it's depending upon how often you collect. As everybody knows, I do have a difference of opinion with the state of Maryland, who says they will not collect water after a rain event because you guys are all supposed to know to not go in the water for 48 hours after a rain event. To me, that actually violates the Clean Water Act that says you have the right as U.S. citizens to be able to swim in your waterways 100% of the time. For a state to tell me I can't swim in my waterway because it's poisoned is just crazy. Hopefully with restoration and with cleaning up after our dogs, you can't really clean up after geese population, but don't feed the geese because they poop a pound a day and they are really high in phosphorus. All the crazy things I know. So we did, after the rain, it rained a lot this summer.
So none of my midshipmen know that they're not supposed to go out after it rains. No, I've fooled them for 10, 12 years. Not one student has ever known this. And this past year, 2 of my students got severe rashes going out in the water and fooling around for a couple of hours. So they're probably out during that big bloom is what they were out in.
This is your SAV data.
All right, let's take a look at SAV. Now, the results for 2018 are not fully there yet. We're kind of like still collating the data, still looking at that. But what we can look at is historic SAV data. And again, so in order to get that long climatology, right? Excuse me, in order to get maybe some idea about what's going on with our grasses, I started to use what the state uses. And what the state uses is data collected from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, BIMS. And so at William and Mary, they do aerial flyovers, right? So they do aerial maps. And so they come out every fall, they do these aerial maps. Here's what's important. Going out and ground truthing, right? So sometimes doing these flybys, they don't really catch everything, right? So especially if you've got very little grass, like oftentimes in the South River, you're like below the mappable scale for grasses, so they don't capture them. So there's a lot of zeros that are put in there, even though they might have, like 8 acres or 13 acres. It's not a lot. They got something. But so I use VIMS data just so I can get, 30 years or so worth of data to see what's going on. So we're looking at this kind of data. The first thing to notice is that, again, the Severn and the McAfee, although they have different numbers at times, there's no statistical difference between the Severn and the McAfee. They're like a nice little family together. But the South, the West, and the Road, they're significantly different from the McAfee and the Severn. They're their own little family. They're quite different, and not in a good way. They got a lot less grasses in the South County area.
Right, no medium.
So here's something that I've been looking at just to tease around this. It turns out that, again, we're talking about climatology. Grasses are doing this. They're going up one year, down the next year, right? You all know this. Some years it's decent, some years it's terrible, and we've been doing this for 30 years. But it turns out it's the climate system. So one of the main climate stressors is actually El Nino, or ENSO processes. You know, that warm current that occurs during Christmas time in the Pacific equatorial regions that has direct influence on weather in other areas. And it turns out that what we're looking at is the fact that there is an anti-phase relationship. That is, they're out of sync with each other. That is, looking at El Nino, El Nino is out of sync with the grasses. So there's about a 2-year lag that occurs between the two of them. So when El Nino, and so warm phase is high, grass is low, but 2-year lag. And when El Nino is less, that is cold phase, grasses come back up. Not a surprise, this is affecting precipitation and temperature. The high precipitation, high temperature causes the hypoxic squeezing, poorer water clarity, and the big blooms, and the die-off of the grasses, the better climate, grasses grow. But there's that lag. So what happened this year doesn't affect it until about 18 months to 2 years later. So you get that slight lag. There's a delay in there. And so those are the things that I'm modeling now, teasing out. This is another mathematical technique to kind of show the same thing. We'll just skip that. And so then we can talk about that, and you can talk about the...
It was hot. And it affected our water temperature.
Yeah,
So one of the hottest, this is in our water, 81 to 82. When you guys went out, that doesn't count the days that people didn't go out. So when you have a heat index of 104 and you're sweltering and you're inside with your air conditioning pumping, the river heats up. Think of your river as a swimming pool in the backyard, then nobody backwashes, the filter's off, and it gets really hot. What's going to happen to it? And you have a bunch of 3-year-olds that pee in it. Right? Because that happens. I had kids. My kids are teenagers. So it gets hot. Algae loves the hot. And they love a lot of nitrogen. They love a lot of phosphorus. And you get these wonderful algae blooms. And the algae dies. So we had hot water. And it goes down into the water column.
Is that this year?
That was this year, yes. And against the long-term mean. And something else that's really important. Not only did we have hot, very hot weather, we had very rainy weather, right? Lots of rain, but we also had a lot of wind. And so many of the DO values that people are seeing that look better, a lot of it is due to wind. Those surface waters were mixing, and then the bottoms didn't get quite as low as they usually do because they were starting at 14 milligrams per liter. And they dropped to 5. Still a lot of squeezing going on there, but they started at a very high level.
So the way you can think of wind going across the water column, some of you guys sail, some of you guys fish. I grew up doing the fishing a lot. You don't go out in the wind because you can't fish. What it does to the water column, it's like making a smoothie in a blender. It aerates it. And it can aerate it pretty far down depending upon the fetch of the wind and the strength of the wind. So pH is really important. A few of us scientists are looking at pH. Ocean acidification, right? You guys have heard of that. Our oceans are becoming more acidified. And what is it happening to our coral reefs? It's killing them.
Yeah.
What is coral made of? What are our oyster shells made of? What do you think is going to happen when our pH drops to the shells? Because I've already witnessed this it actually dissolves the shells and the spat dies. And it's weakening them. I have a scientist friend in Oregon they are seeing that out there. It's weakening the shells. So we're talking about not just we need more oysters to filter the bay, we need a sustainable and resilient habitat, right? Our water quality has to be resilient and sustainable for the fisheries. It is an animal. I have given a lot of talks and people forget that oysters are an animal, right? It may not have a brain, but it's still an animal. And it poops. Do you guys know that oysters poop? Because what happened in Alabama is they took a ton of oysters for oyster restoration, and they put it in the back of a tidal creek. A a triplet. What do you think happened to them? 100% mortality because they pooped on themselves and it was low flushing. So when you do these types of restorations, you have to look at the habitat holistically and resiliency.
Again, look at the environment. This was not a great year for theoretically putting in oyster spat, right? A lot of rain. One of the big stories here, salinity dropped tremendously. Normal salinities around here during the summertime between 10, 12, even up to 14 at times, and certainly at the mouth. But they dropped to about 4. It's way lower. That's what gave rise probably to the false dark mussels in some of these areas. Great, except when the salinity comes back up, and I know a lot of people are, touting false dark mussels, but the fact of the matter is when the salinity comes up, they're going to die. And that's organic matter to the bottom sediments. So
Right,
next season, stay tuned.
Rain, and more rain.
There weren't any jelly.
There weren't any jelly, that's right.
As you put these charts up, can you explain to us non-scientific types what we're actually looking at? So the previous chart,
Yep.
could you go back to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the red line, the blue
Okay.
line, the
Okay.
blue background, and where should we be? In an ideal world, where do we, I don't know if this is good, bad, or indifferent.
Okay, so the pH, according, this is great because they wrote it in Comar, more specifically to freshwater, because freshwater doesn't have a calcium carbonate system. Nobody really worried for decades. Nobody worried about pH in estuaries or our oceans because they assumed that all the calcium carbonate in our oceans would buffer. That's why you take Tums, right, to buffer your stomach. So they just assumed that the oceans would be self-buffering. Didn't work out that way as our oceans and our estuaries are becoming more acidic. But
This is mostly due to nutrients.
Right,
It's
so-
not CO2 coming. For estuaries, it's not so much about global warming in terms of pumping CO2 into the atmosphere. This is about excess nutrients causing basically the same effect.
Right. So we want a pH between 6.5 and 8. So basically neutral. That's what organisms like. Other organisms can live in a broader range, but a lot of our invertebrates cannot. Benthic critters cannot. They need a certain pH, a little more on the neutral side. Same as us, human beings. We need it neutral. So this shows this swing that is happening. This is DNR's data right off of their website.
What's the red line and what's the blue line?
The blue line is the median. The red line is what happened this year.
And the
red
other
line is what?
Median pH.
Thank you.
And so it's right there, pH WT 7.1.
WT is what?
Western Trip.
That's the state's designation.
The state's designation.
Yes,
Right.
that's correct.
So you guys can actually find all this online. If you go to Eyes on the Bay, DNR, Department of Natural Resources, they have 30 years worth of data for their one site there. It's a great, actually, it's a pretty good site.
It's okay.
pH 9 is very high.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to point out. So look at that data point that has pH of 9, 9.2, something like that there, right? 9, very high. Why is it that high? That's an algal bloom. That's the gigantic algal bloom that occurs. What happens is you get this you get a lot of nutrients in, you get mostly stormwater runoff, you get this algal monster rise, so to speak. It's going through photosynthesis, and in the photosynthetic, massive amounts of photosynthesis, you are losing, basically, it's absorbing CO2, taking CO2 out of the system, pH has to go up. And so one way to kind of identify blooms is looking at pH swings. Now here's the thing, though, this is the real bad thing and what's happening, why our oysters are having some problems in other organisms, is that the pH goes up to 9, and then about a week or two later, maybe even a couple of days later, pH crashes. That is, once that algal monster dies and bacteria starts to consume all of the oxygen, the pH crashes. So you can go through these every other week, this 9 to 6 to 9 to 6. Very large swings in pH over short periods of time is not normal.
And it's not
in these
healthy
areas.
for the animals. So imagine having acid indigestion every other day.
If I'm seeing this right, it didn't go much below 7. 7 is neutral,
Right. Right. So again, the pH wasn't terrible. It just shows that there are times when you get these gigantic algal monsters that occur, and then, you've got this excess nutrients driving low dissolved oxygen. So this year, no, not terrible. It's well within, and that blue spread that you see there, that's the spread of the data. That blue,
30 years of data.
Right.
Okay, so rain. So this came right from our weather here. July
about
17th, 3.35 inches. July 21st, 4.79 inches. July 24th, 4 inches. September 9th, 2.2 inches. September 18th, 2.2 inches. 130 rain events this year with over 63 inches of rain. It dropped the salinity to a median of 4.46. It's in practical salinity units. Nobody uses milligrams per liter anymore.
Or parts per
Or
thousand.
parts per thousand. And this is an estuary. It should be around 10. It really shouldn't be in the 4s. So we had a lot of stormwater runoff.
And again, that lower salinity is good for oyster diseases, right? Kills off all the diseases. Not really good for spag. Probably not good for, oyster in terms of doing their thing, right? Making new oysters, that kind of stuff, because they're just surviving. Might sort of kind of be, it's not great for grasses either. We saw some other species of grasses this year, in particular Eurasian milfoil, which again, some people are touting that being great. It can be good for, habitat for juvenile fish. That's great. It's really freshwater species, quite honestly. And so, again, when the salinity comes up, it's all going to die, and that's organic matter to the bottom sediments. So that's what's going to happen.
And all of this, and one of the research things that I had to do for graduate school, as well as my GIS certification, is I had to examine development and use LiDAR to process development. So what a perfect example to you than the Severn in the south. So I looked at the Severn River. So I looked at 1987. I wasn't on this coast at that time, but so if any of you were around here in 1987, things looked a lot different than it does today. So the next one is 1987 LiDAR. Geoprocessed it, and you can see the amount of deforestation to urbanization. The bottom is 1987. Red is our urban areas. So look at the expansive red to March 2018 LiDAR data. With the, we built a lot, right? And we know that. And remember, it wasn't until 2007 that President Obama signed the executive order, which is creating all these restoration jobs. We all know that for hundreds of years we have deforested and changed the landscape. We went through rapid, uncontrolled development from the 80s, and I don't get Wi-Fi here, but there's a great website on Google Earth Engine that you can actually, it does it on really fast, and you can see the rapid development from the 80s all the way to present as it just speeds along, and you can see just the expansion of urban and commercial and mini malls and houses being developed. In the 80s, we were not putting in stormwater retrofits, we were not doing stream restoration, we were not putting in rain gardens. I know Steve Berry from that time probably had been talking about that because that's one of his things, but nobody was doing it, right, at all. So now we're paying for the ticket now of what we did in the past. So this was really enlightening of how, and this is all over. Other friends of mine are doing the same type of work in other areas of the country. On the weird side, I have a friend looking at urbanization, and she's supposed to be looking at the greening of Las Vegas, right? Because everybody wants to put golf courses in. Millennials, the next generation, my generation, we don't golf. So golf courses are going away, and she's seeing more of the desert come back, which is what Vegas really is. So that was interesting. Okay, your development index.
So I've talked about this a little bit before. So what I want to look at is sustainable development, or a sustainable development index. Are we being sustainable? And so what I'm looking at is the percentage of hard surfaces versus the percentage of forested areas. And so you can come up with an index for the different areas of the lower western shore. So higher values, not good, basically, meaning that, or, lower values, that is, you've got more hard surface than you have sort of grasses, or at least trees, I should say. And it turns out that when you take a look at the Magothy River and the Severn River, you're beyond what you really can do. That is, you are not sustainable at all. You have, in fact, for the Magothy River, really bad, because you now have more hard surfaces by far than you have forested areas. This is not sustainable. Southern River's a little bit better, but we need to watch that. There's a question here.
Did you?
Yeah, I flipped it.
Lower, not
Yeah, right, I did flip it.
I just want to make sure I
Yeah,
got
I did flip it. So I did have it the other way before, and I flipped it. But yes, so that's really important to understand that, our politicians, people in charge of doing these kinds of things, DPW, they got to understand, you can't do any more. I mean, we're making one step forward with restoration and 2 steps back with rapid overdevelopment. And on top of that, taking the climate change, we already saw it. How many weather events did we have over 2 inches of rain? How many were 4 inches? If we're increasing, if we're moving to a regime in which we have a greater percentage of 4 to 7 inch rain events, our restoration projects are not built for that. We're going to have more blowouts, we're going to have more failures. On top of that, more development. There's no way, this is a non-star for us. You can't win with those odds. There's no way. You've got to do something that is, we all have to do something about rapid, outrageous, uncontrollable overdevelopment. That's what's going on. We've got to be sustainable. And just saying that we can control the water, when we build a new house, we're not doing it. Because we're having 4-inch rain events. We're not controlling the water. And you've seen it from all of the mud that we saw at the beginning of the season. It looks like Yoo-hoo. Everybody here knows what Yoo-hoo looks like. My students don't know what Yoo-hoo looks like, but all of you do. So that's what the rivers look like when it rains, like this. And of course, you're bringing in supercharged nutrients, and you're wrecking the system. There's no way to advance. It's a non-star.
So I'm down an hour, so skip nitrogen cycling.
Now, how much of this, you talked about like overdevelopment in terms of new houses, but how much of it is like lawn chemicals and all that?
Yeah, lawn chemicals are a real problem also, because a lot of, you see the fluorescent green lawns around here, certainly on the Severn River. I haven't, I'm sure they're on the Magothy River. And so it's important to make sure that, especially that first flush that comes out, if you're not doing anything to control that water, those chemicals that you put on there, they get flushed right in. And so you're adding to the, the nutrient load. There's no stopping that. So you are, especially most people who fertilize greatly, when they use a company, they're greatly over-fertilizing by far. You've all seen the way this is done, even with the way they put in mulch now is done with these little tree volcanoes that they put in. This is a really bad idea for the trees to do that kind of stuff. Decreases their life cycle, so to speak. It's great for them to build new. I see it all the time in the neighborhood counties. Build,
Chop the big tree down.
Chop the big tree down, put the little seed in the back in.
And it dies that season.
Job secured. Get it.
All right. So conclusions. We need to understand the entire system and help our politicians make good, sustainable, resilient, long-term decisions, and not one size fits all and patch it together. We seem to be doing that a lot. Americans do that a lot. Human beings do that a lot. We need to get away from that. Physics dominates it. We had talked about before, it's not Coriolis, it's us.
Yeah, it's the creeks. I mean, it's the creeks. It's not the Susquehanna River.
It's not the Susquehanna River.
Right.
Even though that was a problem this year, if you were out there, they released the Conowingo many times. It was a problem for the bay. Probably loss of bay grasses, probably a loss of a lot of our oyster reefs because they just released the gates. Yeah. Temperature is critical important.
Something else that I just wanted to point out, I know we didn't go over the nitrogen cycle stuff, but a lot of people will talk about this business of denitrification. This is where you have the nutrients that are coming out from the oyster poop sort of get remineralized into this elemental nitrogen, and then it's supposed to escape to the atmosphere. It's a nice idea in theory, thermodynamically favorable, yes, but the reaction is very, very slow. In fact, it's so slow that you've got plenty of bacteria just waiting to pick that elemental nitrogen right back up and start the process all over again. So you're not pooping directly into the sediments. Even if you are, that denitrification, that elemental nitrogen that's coming back out, very little of it is escaping to the atmosphere. During the summer, it's picked right back up. This is the reason why we have rolling blooms. This is why we have the extended anoxia that we saw in Winchester Lump. It's this constant recycling. It's like a shell game. We don't have big circulation in these tributaries. This is very stagnant water. We don't have large tidal range. All of the mixing is mostly done by the wind. Don't have gigantic currents here usually. And so what happens is nutrients get stockpiled. And so all you're doing, oysters are very good at sequestering nutrients for a short period of time, and then they release them. So they either go to the sediments, they go to the water column, back to the oysters, and in the meantime, algal monsters grow and decay over time, creating the wave that we're looking at, grasses, dissolved oxygen, the climate.
So we need to do, as you guys know, Andrew and I in our shtick of, nobody really restores anything. We're not a car. We're not going to restore a really old I used to drive a 67 Plymouth Fury that, with chrome and all that. You can't restore. You restore a car. You restore a house. You cannot restore, you rehabilitate. It's like somebody going with diabetes or me with breast cancer. I can be rehabilitated. We need to rehabilitate this sustainably, ecological resilience, looking at it holistically, taking into account climate change, which does happen no matter what our federal government says. We do have climate change and it is impacting us. We are going to see more 4 to 7 inches of rain more often. We're going to see a lot more heat, a lot more often, so we need to plant certain species of trees. Cleveland has changed their whole tree planting guide because of climate. So instead of planting trees that they would have planted 30 years ago, they're planting trees for the climate in the future so that they will be sustainable. Palm trees, that's right.
There's two other very quick things that I wanted to say before we open up to more questions. The first thing is that we need to think about sustainable habitats or sustainable ecology, not sustainable engineering. It's really important to think about it that way. We want to build for the habitat, not for the engineering project. And the other thing is, I did forget to say this, and I always need to say this, my disclaimer. All the opinions I've expressed today are mine. Not necessarily Naval Academy, not the Department of Navy, not the Department of Defense. I guarantee you the White House does not share my opinions. Or any government agency that I may have worked for in the past, present, or future, secret or not. This is my opinions on it. Based on science, but
they can be from Maritimas. So I have opened up my own nonprofit to help you guys, help things like this. And train people, Maritimas is just Latin for coastal. I've worked with a lot of riverkeepers internationally, training them to do the same thing. So I thought, why not? Since I like doing it, might as well do it.
So, questions?
So Andrew, in the past, if I remember, you made the point where you say it's about the creeks.
Right.
Yeah.
It's triplets,
It's
man.
not that the Severn is getting flushed by the bay. Right?
No.
That is not happening.
It's not really happening. It can happen, but this is not. You're not getting poisoned waters at low DO coming in from the Susquehanna River. What you're getting is high nutrients coming in from the creeks. Even when we take a look at nutrients coming from the bay, it's far less than what's coming into those creeks. And so the creeks are the source of what's going on. And this is why you're seeing the algal monsters growing in the creeks and moving out rather than the other way. So rarely do we see invasions of low bottom dissolved oxygen or even nutrients in any measurable or important quantities coming in from the Susquehanna River. And so the point being, and I appreciate what you're saying, is we can fix what's going on in the Susquehanna River. That's great. We can limit nutrients and that kind of stuff. That'll be very good for the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay. But none of you live on the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay. You're worried about your backyard, which is probably on one of those triplets.
So in layman's terms, we're polluting ourselves.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's exactly it.
But
It's us.
so what it really means, take ownership of it and fix it. Let's fix it together. Let's fix it collaboratively. We are tired of everybody arguing of it's his fault, it's the farmers, it's the watermen, it's this. Let's just get over the arguing and just fix it. I'm the mom that, if milk spills, let's just clean it up. John.
Oh, so on one of your earlier slides, when you're talking about hypoxic squeeze, you had a list of a lot of the creeks up there,
Right.
but it went fast. Is there, so we weren't able to, I wasn't able to see our creek. And I think it was up there, but can we get from you a PDF of some of this data that we can share with people who maybe aren't believers like?
You just read my what's next. So what's next? So this will be available on my website and SRA's website and SRK's website.
And what are your websites?
Severn River Keeper, Severn River Association, and Maritimas USA. It's not up there yet. And one of the next year's things, team, I would love if we could get a Google data sheet together and you guys do the data entry. Andrew and I will QC it
Spend a
and
lot of
get it
hours
out there. Get it out there live so you guys can actually see the data on a clickable map on their websites so that it's available. Because I do that with, well, I can cheat because I can go out with my own instrument and see what the salinity is. But you guys want to do that all the time. So that is definitely our next year. But a PDF of this will get on their
So
website.
the long story short, we will get it out on, we'll get it on the appropriate websites. You can contact the, either us or Severn River Association, Tom Gay, or Sarah Coldez, or whoever. Yes, you can get that kind of stuff. Some of this is like really spanking new, like the hypoxic squeeze stuff. I'm happy to share it. Of course, I'm going to try to publish it, but that's the other stuff.
Okay, JP.
Yeah.
Let me just put a footnote and cheer for that. It is in the creeks. The bad news for our river is that we can't blame anybody else. You're exactly right. This is us, right here. It's long residence time. We have to deal with what we put into the river. And most of it is runoff or groundwater. We can't point to a particular pipe. So yeah, this one's on us. That's the bad news. The good news is, it's on us. We've got the power to do something.
That I couldn't agree more with that.
Then we can vote in who we want to help us fix it.
The other thing, and we got a remarkable new county council coming in to deal with it, and some of our new folks are interested in this. The other thing I've got to say is, I'm a come here. I've only been here 45 years. I haven't been here as long as Dan Mellon has. This river is way better off than it was in the 1980s.
Yeah, I think that's right.
We are making progress. Don't forget that. Hold on to that with both hands.
Yeah,
But
I do
at the
agree with that.
same time,
Yeah.
look at how much more it could be as we rehabilitate.
Absolutely.
Way back
This
then.
was a weird year.
It was.
I've never seen, back in late April, I've got one thing in my data book from Winchester alone, of supersaturated oxygen down 5 and 6
Yeah.
meters. In other words, that bloom, that mahogany tide bloom that we had, was 15 to 18 feet thick, lying like a blanket on top of this river.
Yep.
Where'd that come from, you guys? I'm just a muddy boot fishhead. You're the scientist. Where'd that come from?
This year was
February rain?
Yeah, it was all of that rain. It's just and we're seeing those kinds of things all over the Chesapeake Bay. We saw this down in Virginia as well. same kind of this gigantic monsters taking over large sections of the James River, which is also fairly unheard of as well, and very deep. So yeah, you're right. We just had a tremendous amount of rain, and earlier than we usually have.
We could not have picked a worse year
Yeah.
to put those oyster babies in.
Unfortunately, nobody, myself included, nobody saw that coming. It was a very weird year. I do think this is something that we need to try to get, something that I'm trying to get a handle on, as my students and I try to model the climate system so that we can get out ahead of these kinds of things to make better management decisions. If I could figure out, I've done it a little bit for the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay, just because we've got a lot of really good data, long data sets, I've been able to predict hypoxic volume 10 years in the future, actually quite accurately, using nutrients and winds and Susquehanna River flow. But I don't have the model quite for like the Severn River. Physics a little bit trickier.
Some of my boat builder friends in down East Maine who film me and talk to me like to say, Dr. Muller, Capt. Muller, the only people predict weather are fools and strangers. You can? Really? Yeah, fair enough.
Awesome.
We take what we get.
There you
and
go.
we deal with it.
Okay, wait.
How can we get to a situation where we have a much more holistic approach to this whole issue? Right now, we have, on the one hand, we've got stormwater runoff issues. On the other hand, we've got septic system issues. On the third hand, we've got lawn fertilization issues. They're all being dealt with excuse me, as individual little problems. And we have no idea which is the most important, from a public perspective at least, which is the most important, which is going to give us the best bang for the buck. Does it make sense to put most of our money into septic system treatment, or into stormwater management, or a combination of the two? What are the real goals for a rehabilitation? Where are we trying to get to?
You've asked the quintessential question. I mean, this is what it's really all about. I have been complaining about this to EPA for the last 5-6 years, that a number of people are working on different things. We're not talking to each other. We don't know. We've made guesses constantly about what we think the most important things are. We don't know. And quite honestly, it's going to take a redirection of funds in terms of better research. And I know that sounds terrible in some cases, but we really need to research what's going on in these areas. The problem is there's zero money for research in these tributaries. There is no money right now. That's why we started this triplet idea to get other scientists, the ones who are interested in exactly what you're talking about, those who are interested in stormwater, those that are interested in septics, those that are interested in bottom sediments, to work collaboratively in one of these tributary systems, or a couple of these tributary systems, to nail down exactly the question that you're asking, so that we could then take the rehabilitation money and get the best bang for a buck. But quite honestly, right now, we are taking basically darts in the dark and how to solve this problem. Sometimes we hit, but we're missing an awful lot.
So to back Andrew up on that, Europe, there's a thing called sustainability science, and it hasn't hit America yet. They're doing it in Europe, and it's working. Sustainability science is not just sustainability. There's all sorts of definitions. Sustainability science does what you're talking about. A group of eggheads and managers and health practitioners are put into a room together, and they work it out together. That's what, because you need the health aspects, because they're the ones seeing people with Vibrio and enterococci contamination. We know that there's bacteria problems. We know that there's septic problems. We need everybody in one room. The whole idea at the EPA TMDL was to try to do that, and they're really not. We have the water quality get, the fisheries get, all these GITs, these goal implementation teams, right? 20 of them, all figured out. They all have their own meetings.
And they don't really talk to each
And
other all
nobody,
that
and
much.
sometimes you can be on multiple teams, but nobody is intertwining together. So what they've done in Europe is they've intertwined all these peoples together and said, fix it and come up with a plan. So that's what we need to do. You guys can do it. We can work together and we can take it to Pittman and to the other county council and said, this is what we need to do.
Along those lines, just as a quick follow-up, personally, I think the TMDL is the worst thing that ever happened because the Bay program is predicting the TMDLs on modeling and almost nothing on measurement, and so the model is modeled on another model on another model. Personal feed. But what I would like to suggest is, if we can, that the Riverkeeper, SRA, Severn River Commission, the community college, anyone else that is interested, try and put together a Severn River interest group to use the river as a model to try and figure out where we want to go, how we can get there, and what we can do as the best bang for the buck. So,
Sounds good.
Yeah, no,
Severn
include
River
me.
Sustainability Plan.
Include me and Diana, please.
Okay, right here in the corner under the clock.
As you guys might have noticed, a lot of this room's filled with the choir. To some extent. These are CBF folks, these are Severn River folks, South River folks. Many of us remember when they're rehabilitating back. But you got 5 middle schoolers here, and I would say to you, there's no bigger audience than them. And so the answer to the question holistically is, what better county in the Bay, maybe in the country, with our shoreline in Anne Arundel County, to take STEM to the next level and have it be a Bay Steward program?
Yeah,
We should
all
be
for
taking
that.
80,000 kids and volunteers, and their science and technology should not just be about whatever, it should be about saving these waters.
yeah.
And so
Totally
what
agree.
you do is encourage these guys to have a chance to make a difference, as opposed to just us.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's part of the key here, is because change comes from the younger generation.
And that's
it's really
like
what
the
happens.
20 billionth reason I decided to set up my own company. I'm a certified high school teacher for STEM. I taught at Cat North for a few years. I didn't like being physically assaulted by students. But what I learned from our school system is they like the quick and dirty, shake and bake, pretend models, and I'm all about getting these kids outside. I was teaching kids who had never seen the Chesapeake Bay. We took them on a field trip to Sandy Point State Park. They had never seen the beach. They have never seen the bay. They live around the Fort Meade area. They go from their rugged townhome. These are very urban, very poor children, teenagers. They went from their townhome. They went to high school. They went to their job at the mall. They went back home. They didn't leave their 10-mile radius. They went to Arlington Echo, but sometimes they didn't get to go because they weren't allowed to go by their parents. Things happen. So we took them to Sandy Point State Park.
Yeah.
And we had to actually, even though we were trying to get them to do water quality and seine netting and doing all this stuff, they needed time just to be kids and play on a beach. They need, we're raising our kids to not experience the outdoors, the whole nature deficiency disorder. And without that, they're not going to appreciate the bay. That's my big speech on that, because I grew up outside. So yes, we need more. We need to get them outside with the real instruments.
So I've been on the Severn for 14 years. There have been a lot of rainy years. And why this year, where there's so many false start mussels, why was it so different? And is that a little buffer that we can rely on when we have heavy rains to boost the filtration?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There is active research going on. I'm not a biologist. It looks like, false start mussels have a range of salinities from about a half a PSU to about 12. But it seems as if they like it right at around that 4. So, when salinity drops, so it's not just the rain event It's the rain event with opening up of the Conowingo Dam that created so much fresh water, and so we oftentimes see this first in places like the Magothy River, who are a little bit fresher anyway. They get this eruption, if you will, or explosion of these false dark mussels. And again, like I said, I'm not 100% sure, and there are lots of scientists who are looking at, why a particular year you get these eruptions. There's some life cycle issues that people need to work out with that kind of stuff. Is there some benefit? Yes, there's some benefit because they filter like crazy, they grow very rapidly. My concern about this, I don't want to rely on a species that doesn't really dominate here. When you see false dark mussels erupting in this particular area, it's bad news for oysters. It's freshening the system. It's bad news later on, potentially for other things, because we're shifting the system to a freshwater system, which is not what our oysters are used to in this area. So, I don't know how to exactly answer your question, because there's still active research going on there, but I wouldn't rely tremendously on those, because we still haven't nailed down, and there's this issue of organic matter loading when they die, when the salinity comes back, and the fact that if they're up, oysters are probably down.
Okay. Tom says one more, so we'll go all the way in the back.
How effective are those people in Europe at accomplishing the goals that they were trying to meet?
They brought back their forest and they cleaned the water. So that's good. And we've done it here. The Cuyahoga River, they really took, it's not on fire anymore. So, and they've restored it. The Great Lakes, they've had their share. So it is possible. I'm the person of the water, my wine glass is always full. So we can do it. Maybe I should drink it now. Okay.
All right. Keep going.
Okay.
Sir, happy to take questions. Yeah.
Right here.
You haven't mentioned herbicides, and when these downpours come and people put their Roundup all around,
yes.
that has to be washed into the river.
Certainly.
Oh, so that's a whole nother research project that I'm really interested in. So
can't they be outlawed or something? I mean,
well, and there has been. So Roundup's been outlawed in other countries.
Europe.
Right. Europe has outlawed Roundup. We need more of us to go and testify to outlaw these chemicals. It is carcinogenic. Monsanto was sued. The guy won, even though he's probably still going to pass away from a horrible form of cancer. But it can be done, and you are absolutely right. And if you guys, my latest research, part of my whole master's thesis right now, is pharmaceuticals in our waterways. And if you guys know what I know right now about drugs in our waterways, you'll never want to eat a damn oyster again. We have so much tamoxifen, metformin, galidium, Roundup, and this is projects that NOAA did, and our country has stopped it, but we have a lot, every time we flush the toilet, our wastewater treatment plants are not capable, and the regulations say they don't have to take care of pharmaceuticals. So it's not only herbicides and pesticides, it's all the other drugs that we flush down the toilet. Our bodies, every time I take tamoxifen as an ER positive ex-cancer patient, my body only absorbs about 6% of it. The rest of it, you guys urinate out. All the drugs, your vitamin C, everything goes out and flush it down the drain. It goes to your wastewater treatment plant and it goes right out into the system. Many of these things do not photodegrade at all.
So just a quick sort of backstory on this.
So yes, we need to take care of that. You are right.
I was, just to really get you into thinking about this, in 2011 I was part of a group that was studying Fukushima Daiichi issues. So looking at radiation, getting into estuaries in Japan. They needed a model for this. NOAA didn't have a model to do this, to make these kind of predictions. And my team and my partners, Joe Smith and I, were contracted to create a model to look at this. So we actually used the Potomac River as our test bed because we had another project there. But the thing is, we were looking at how do we ground truth our model, because we don't have cesium-137 in the Potomac River. So what we did is we looked at a whole suite of metals, and one of them that came up in high concentrations was the galadium. And galadium is a rare earth mineral, and the question was, where is all of that coming from? Well, guess what? Galadium is used as a contrasting material for MRIs. And what's all around the Potomac?
A lot of
Hospitals.
All right, you're the last question or comment or statement.
Me?
Yep.
Thank you. One just reflection about herbicides. It's easy for us to think about something that kills. The weird thing, and I don't want to minimize what you all were just talking about, because we do have toxic issues. But the weird thing about this system is that what we're doing is overfeeding it. Our biggest problem is fertilizer. It's nitrogen and phosphorus.
Clearly.
That's weird. Nutrients are good.
That's right.
Now, but the working theory about nutrients. If we took a superb physical specimen, like SRA's program officer up there, if Tom is this good at 3,000 calories a day, wouldn't he be 5 times as good if we fed him 15,000 calories a day?
Yeah, more isn't always better.
That's about what we were doing to this ecosystem Bay-wide in the 1980s. Now we've got Tom down to maybe 5,000 calories at this point. But it is really weird. And where did nitrogen and phosphorus come from? Doctors Muller, Capt, Dr. Muller, and Capt Muller. Us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Us, everything from manure, livestock manure, and septic systems, God forbid, to our tailpipes and our power plants.
Yeah.
And
legacy. It's just weird. Pogo had it right, saying we have met the enemy.
Yeah, there you go.
And all the rest.
Yes.
And it's really weird. The last thing I want to do is put in a plug for another shellfish. Dark false mussels come up every time we get a whole ton of rain. Steve Barry's seen stacks of this over the years up at Arlington Echo. We get dark false mussels and they come and they go, and bless their hearts, they do clear the river out, but they do leave a lot of VOD, biological oxygen demand, when they die. When we look at oysters, if you ever pick up a clump of oysters and there's some little brown bivalve shellfish hooked on there that we would refer to as hooked mussels, kiss them too, because they're part of what makes this all tick. And they're not getting quite as much credit as oysters, but they're real. It really does mean getting back those bottom communities on hard bottom that are based on oysters and crushed concrete properly placed, and granite rock properly placed, all in the right places. But getting those diverse communities back based on oysters, but growing beyond, they're huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're a really big deal.
I can't argue that any better than that. Yeah.
So similar
Thank
to a
you
coral
so
reef.
much.
All right, guys,
for what you did.
we got a call. Let's have a round for Captain Muller and Andrew Muller. Come on, they did a great job. And thank you guys for coming out.